The sound of laughter filled the diner that afternoon, the kind of cruel, mocking laughter that makes even the air feel heavy. It came from a booth near the window where a group of wealthy, entitled teenagers lounged, tossing their car keys on the table, as if the world belonged to them. Outside, luxury cars gleamed in the sunlight, parked recklessly across 2 spots each. Inside, the waitress named Maggie tried to steady her trembling hands as she refilled a coffee cup. She'd been on her feet since dawn, trying to make enough tips to buy groceries for the week. The smell of burnt toast, the hiss of frying bacon, the clinking of plates, it was her world, small and tiring but honest. Yet in a moment, all of that would turn into a nightmare she would never forget. If you believe that kindness still matters in this world, that respect, empathy, and second chances can change lives, then please take a moment to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Because stories like this one remind us that even in a cruel world, there are still those who stand up for what's right. Maggie had seen rude customers before. She'd been ignored, mocked, even flirted with uncomfortably by drunk men. But this was different. The boy sitting at the booth, maybe 19 or 20, with perfectly styled hair and a smug grin, looked at her like she wasn't human. His name was Ethan, the son of a wealthy real estate developer. The diner was his playground, a place where he and his friends came to laugh at the help. When Maggie asked what he wanted to drink, he looked up with a smirk and said, "Serve me like a dog." His friend snickered. Maggie froze, her heart pounding in her chest, but she swallowed her pride and did her job. She poured his coffee, trying not to meet his eyes. But when a small splash of hot coffee accidentally touched his wrist, Ethan reacted in the most humiliating way imaginable. He spat his drink right into her face, for a split. Second, the entire diner went silent. Coffee dripped from Maggie's chin, her white uniform stained brown. Her lips trembled, her eyes burned, but she said nothing. Her breath came out in shallow gasps as she turned toward the counter, trying not to cry. Somewhere in the back, someone muttered, "What the hell?" But most people just looked away. Nobody wanted trouble. Nobody except the group that had been sitting quietly in the farthest booth. They were hard to miss, a line of leather jackets, patches reading Hell's Angels, men with scarred knuckles, tattooed arms, and expressions that spoke of lives lived on the edge. 50 bikers, road-worn and silent, had been eating breakfast there since morning. They hadn't come for trouble. They'd come for peace, a meal, a few laughs before hitting the highway again. But what they saw that afternoon stirred something deep inside them. The man at the center of the group, Reed Carson, the leader, had seen many things in his life: violence, betrayal, pain. But the sight of that young woman being humiliated for simply doing her job lit a fire in him he hadn't felt in years. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand abruptly. He simply placed his fork down, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and looked toward Ethan's table with eyes cold as steel. Maggie, still shaking, retreated behind the counter. Her coworker whispered, "Don't say anything. It's not worth it." But inside, something in her was breaking. She'd been struggling for months, a single mother, abandoned by her husband, raising a little boy at home who waited for her every night. Every penny mattered. Every shift was survival. And yet here she was, degraded like she was nothing. Then, the sound of heavy boots echoed on the diner floor. Reed and his crew stood up together, moving with quiet power. Every head turned. The teenagers' laughter faded as the bikers approached. Reed stopped by the booth, towering over Ethan, his shadow falling across the table. The entire diner held its breath. Reed's voice was calm, but it carried weight, the kind that could make grown men shrink. "You think you're a big man," he said softly, "spitting on a woman who's just trying to earn a living?" Ethan tried to play it cool. "Hey, it was a joke," he said, chuckling nervously, but his friends had already lost their smiles. Reed leaned down until his face was inches away. "Then let me show you how a man acts when someone disrespects a woman." The silence was so deep you could hear the hum of the lights above. Then Reed turned to Maggie. "You okay, sweetheart?" he asked gently. She nodded weakly, eyes filled with tears she couldn't hold back anymore. Reed turned back to Ethan, his jaw tightening. "You're gonna clean this mess up, And then you're gonna apologize. At first, Ethan laughed, but when the rest of the bikers closed in behind Reed, their presence heavy and unflinching, the laughter died in his throat. 50 pairs of eyes, men who'd faced death and worse, stared him down. His arrogance melted away. His trembling hands reached for a napkin as he stammered out an apology. The entire diner watched as the rich kid who'd spat on a waitress cleaned her uniform, mumbling sorry again and again. Maggie tried to stop him, whispering that it was enough, but Reed shook his head. "Let him remember this," he said quietly. Word spread fast. People started recording on their phones, and soon the clip of the humbled rich teen went viral online. But for Maggie, it wasn't about revenge or shame. It was about dignity. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, respected, protected. Reed and his men didn't stay long after that. They paid for everyone's meals, left a $1,000 tip, and before leaving, Reed handed Maggie a small card with a number. "If you ever need anything," he said, "you call us." Life didn't magically become easy after that day, but something changed in Maggie. She carried herself differently. She smiled more, spoke more confidently, and even began to dream again. The diner owner promoted her to shift manager, impressed by how she handled herself despite the humiliation. The memory of that day, painful as it was, became a turning point. And as for Ethan, he faced consequences he couldn't buy his way out of. His father was furious when the video surfaced online. And for the first time, Ethan faced the real world without his wealth to protect him. The humiliation became a lesson that money couldn't erase. Weeks later, Maggie received a letter at the diner. It was from Ethan. He wrote about how that day had changed him, how he'd started volunteering at a homeless shelter to understand the people he used to mock. He said he was sorry, truly sorry, and hoped one day she could forgive him. Maggie didn't know what to say, but she smiled softly and folded the letter away. Sometimes pain becomes the teacher life uses to make us grow. Months passed, and one night, as Maggie was closing up, she heard the familiar rumble of motorcycle engines outside. She stepped out, and there they were, Reed and his crew, parked neatly in a row, their headlights illuminating the quiet street. Reed grinned and handed her a small envelope. Inside was a donation receipt, $10,000 made to a local children's charity in her name. "We figured you'd do something good with it," he said. Maggie's eyes welled up. "Why me?" she asked. Reed shrugged. "Because you reminded us what strength looks like." She never forgot those words. They stayed with her on the hardest days, when bills piled up or when her son got sick. She knew now that there were people in the world who didn't just talk about justice, they lived it. And even though she rarely saw Reed again, every time a motorcycle roared by the diner, she smiled and whispered a quiet thank you. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about punishment. It was about respect, about standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. Maggie learned that day that kindness isn't weakness, and standing tall after being broken is the bravest thing a person can do. If this story touched your heart, if you believe no one deserves to be humiliated for trying to make an honest living, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe so more people can hear stories that restore faith in humanity. And before you go, comment below, what would you have done if you were in that diner that day? Would you have stood up for Maggie or stayed silent like everyone else? Because sometimes the smallest act of courage can change someone's life forever.